Welcome everyone to this week's video. Today we are on Fish Friday number 255 and we have a good one for you today. Today's fish is one of the most well-known fish we've talked about on this channel and is actually a really cool fish in its own way, but it's honestly so well known that I'm surprised that I hadn't talked about it yet. So when this was suggested, I jumped right on it. Today's fish that we're going to be talking about is bam! The golden shiner. Now the golden shiner, or scientific name Notomogonus chrysoleucus, again that is Notomogonus chrysoleucus, it is part of the family Leucissidae, which is the family that is formerly part of Cyprinidae. We've talked about it before, but Leucissidae recently got split from Cyprinidae. Some people still don't have it fully split. I'm not entirely sure if the American Fisheries Society has accepted that change, but it seems to be headed that way, so I figured I might as well get started with this. Now, the golden shiner is actually fairly interesting because it's actually the only member of its subfamily Leucissinae in North America. So essentially all of this fish's closest relatives are actually found over in Europe and Asia. And it is actually the only member of its genus, I believe. I don't think there's any Notomogonus over in Europe, and it wouldn't make sense. So yeah, it's actually a fairly unique fish, even though it is so ubiquitous throughout almost all bodies of water of the United States. Its native range is the Atlantic drainage basin of North America. Basically, any river that drains into the Atlantic Ocean or the Gulf of Mexico, it was or is found there, and it has been relocated to other bodies of water as well. And I believe it's possibly the most stocked. It's definitely in the running for most stocked fish in North America, if not the world. Now, we've talked about, the most stocked sort of game fish, and I didn't really elaborate on there, whether it's channel catfish, largemouth bass, or anything like that. But in terms of the actual most pure biomass, most stocked fish, it's probably the golden shiner. Now, the golden shiner is found in a variety of habitats. With that large of a home range, you can bet your bottom dollar that they're pretty much habitat generalistic. I mean, find them in lakes, ponds, swamps, creeks, small, medium rivers. Not so much in larger rivers, and that's really because you usually find these in slow-moving or stagnant waters. And there's usually at least some vegetation, and we'll talk a little more about that in a little later on. Now, it is a relatively small fish. They can reach relatively significant lengths, though. They can get up to about 30 centimeters, which is around 11 inches. I'll be completely honest, this picture right here I would consider a monster golden shiner. I've never seen one this large. I think the largest one I've seen reached up to 7 inches, and I thought that was a sight to behold. But they're usually between 7.5 and 12.5 centimeters, which is 3 to 5 inches long. Usually very, very small. The back is usually this sort of darker olive along the top, quickly transitioning to these silver sides. Relatively large scales for the size of fish. Very silvery white belly. Kind of that's kind of standard minnow color, and it is a very deep-bodied minnow. It's laterally compressed. It's not like shad level of compressed or deep-bodied, but it's pretty up there. This picture really doesn't do it justice, but it has this very small upturned mouth. You can see it here. Just a really tiny mouth. I should mention that this is more than likely in breeding season, which is why its fin are so colorful. However, even outside of breeding season, you'll still get this orangish tint to the mouse. And honestly, when they are outside of breeding, you'll kind of get this goldish sheen along the side, which is where it got its name. Now, it does have this relatively large anal fin that has this almost semi-hook at the leading edge of it. And it has kind of a smaller dorsal fin, and it's just this smaller triangular, sort of fin. It seems small for the body. But how do you know you have a golden shiner? Well, there's two ways. And one of them, once you know how to look for it, is completely obvious. And that is, it has a lateral line that is strongly down curved. And I mean strongly down curved. It's starting at above the gill plate and coming down almost to the bottom part of the gill plate. And you can see here, it's a significant decurve, which is not really common in the fisheries world. The other way is that it does have a keeled belly, meaning its belly comes to a relatively sharp V. But what's interesting about that keel is it actually doesn't have scales. So if you ran your finger down it, it wouldn't have scales catching your fingernail no matter which direction you go. And that is the actual true diagnostic characteristic that is used. I mean, once you have seen one of these and you learn to look for that lateral line, it's very hard to mess this fish up with anything else. Now, it is a schooling fish, as many minnows are, and they primarily eat plankton, which is why they have such a small mouth, and why they have that slightly upturned mouth, is because they're actually kind of feeding along the upper edges of the water column, and they will eat microbugs along the top of the water as well, but they're primarily planktonivorous. Now, how do they reproduce? Well, they actually reproduce by spawning aggregations over vegetation, which is why usually you find these with some sort of vegetated waters. Vegetation is actually fairly important to them. They'll have a spawning aggregation and the eggs will stick to the veg. And then when the young hatch, they'll actually school together. Now, I did see some research that said they actually will lay their eggs in a predator's nest, so a largemouth bass or a bowfin nest, which would allow them to sort of have fry that's semi-protected by there. I'm not sure 100% on that, if that's true or not. If it is, it's actually an ingenious method of egg laying that allows them to really protect their eggs with minimal effort. Basically, as soon as they can get in, they can get out. But because predators are usually fairly good about protecting their nests from stuff like that, that's why I'm a little hesitant on that one. But for the interesting fact we're going to end the video on, like many of the other minnows, and we've talked about this in the past, golden shiners are sensitive to an alarm substance called Schreckstoff. Now, the Schreckstoff substance, it is sort of like a flight hormone that minnows will release into the water to say predators are near, and that's why so many minnows are schooling. And you know, when you have a school of minnows, if you harm one, they'll actually really disperse, and it makes predatory predation fairly difficult once you get that past that initial one. And you know, we've talked about Schreckstoff in the past, and while it is interesting in its own right, there was something interesting I found out while doing research on the golden shiner. And I found out that the Schreckstoff pheromone can actually survive intact in the feces of a predator. And minnows can actually use that to detect predators as well, and help them avoid areas where there might be high predators. In a lab, golden shiners were actually found to react strongly to water that contained feces from snakes that had eaten other golden shiners, but did not react to as heavily to water that had feces from snakes that had eaten a different fish that don't possess this alarm sensor. Meaning there's two sort of things that really piqued my interest in that. Number one, the fact that the pheromone survives through the digestive process is pretty interesting and is actually a fairly neat adaptation that allows minnows to avoid areas of high predator concentrations. Rather than just being a simple fight or flight pheromone, it's actually a let's stay out of this area, a lot of predators are here. But what was interesting to me was actually in the last sentence, they didn't react nearly as much to waters that had the feces of a snake that had eaten different fish. And there's two ways to interpret that. One is that even though that fish that it was fed didn't possess Schreckstoff, it could be producing some sort of other fight or flight pheromone. Which in the case of minnows, I should say, it's just flight. There is no fight in a minnow. But the more interesting sort of thinking is the fish are actually reacting to the predator's feces regardless, meaning that somewhere in their brain they have actually evolved to already detect the feces of their predators. And they just didn't react as strongly because those predators had not eaten other fish. And there's multiple ways you can think about it is, well, maybe the predators have so much better things to eat that they're not eating the minnows, so the predators are here, but they're not feeding on the minnows yet. Or, just flat, we know there's a predator here. It opens up a really neat sort of scientific thinking process, if you want to think about it like that. It was a really, really neat thing to me, and I'm probably going to be thinking about this over the course of the weekend. But thank you guys so much again. I really appreciate it. Hope to see you again. If you'd like to support the channel, please click the link down below. It is by no means expected, but very much appreciated. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Regardless, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and peace.